Live and direct, live and a date, no jive.
Legalize it.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Welcome back to another episode of the Koala Podcast. And in this episode, we've got another presentation from our Sydney conference on the 21st of November 2025. The conference is all about can Australia teach anybody else information about cannabis regulation from its experience over the past decade or so. This speaker is one of the most respected and longest term sort of drug policy people in Australia. Her name is Fiona Patten, and her presentation in the afternoon was, "Can Australia be a leader again in drug policy, or will we remain as an example of what not to do?" Fiona is a former member of the Victorian Parliament and a cannabis law reform advocate. She was first elected to Victoria's State Parliament in 2014 and re-elected for a second term in 2018. During those 8 years, she was champion for social justice and cannabis law reform. She established a medical cannabis taskforce in the first Australian major attempt to fix the roadside drug testing laws, and was one of the driving forces behind the inquiry into the use of cannabis in Victoria. She says, "I went into Parliament in 2014 as the first MP to speak about using cannabis. Cannabis reform has always been high on my to-do list and is unfinished business for me. To open up law reform in the States, we need to change federal law, and I intend to just do that." She was also, as she says, the first political party leader to happily admit to using cannabis regularly to relax, God forbid. It's fantastic to have Fiona. We thank her very much for her time. This is what she had to say.
In many ways, in reflecting on today, I've been thinking, well, how on earth can Australia have any impact on United Nations reform? And then I remember Alex, and we look at the changes to our UN conventions around harm reduction, and that came out of Australia. It was Alex's work during HIV that created needle exchanges, and we started having a different thought about people who use drugs, and that has been translated into our UN conventions. Again, no. I mean, I was born out of the HIV era. That's my origin story as to why I'm standing here today talking about drug law reform. I used to volunteer on one of those needle exchange buses in Canberra and got involved also with sex work. And men who have sex with men. I was volunteer at the AIDS Council. I also grew my own cannabis, and I have done for over 35 years. Never been busted, because I am a white, middle-class, suburban woman. Someone did jump off my fence and steal one of my plants once. Looking at you, finally. 30 years later, I finally got it. And I did have a pretty close run in Thailand once when I was smoking some pot on the beach. But I think it was 500 baht, fixed that quite easily. But I think what I'm reflecting on this is, as we look at those conventions, and largely they have been ignored. I mean, in Australia, we put our hand up saying, oh, we can't change our laws because of those conventions. But then on the other side, we ignore all the other conventions, all the other human rights conventions that we are signatories to. We're incarcerating 10-year-olds in this country. So in some ways, I'm not certain that the conventions are relevant, but I think it's really relevant what Colombia is doing. And the fact that that motion has been successful, and that there will be a review of these conventions. Okay, United States, Canada, Germany, Uruguay, Malta, you name it, have ignored those conventions, those drug conventions, but they're coming back. We are coming back to that review. And I think it was something that Alex and Jeff picked up in those last things. the connection and the fact that the WHO and the UN are connecting drug policy with human rights. And I think that is really crucial. And I think that is actually probably one of the sort of little avenues that may get us to more compassionate and better drug policies, both at an international level and at a national level, because it is a human rights issue. And that's what we've been arguing in Australia, that this is a human rights issue, that, you know, that the laws, and as we saw from the sort of warm-up exercise this morning, where most of us did look at the fact that these were racial, you know, that the enforcement of our laws affect our Indigenous brothers and sisters. They affect anyone who is brown in this country far more than they're going to affect me and frankly the majority of people in this room. So can we help, which was what Sean sort of is posing the question, like, can Australia help with UN reform, and can this group here help with that? And I came into this morning thinking, no bloody way. I mean, Australia, we don't even listen to UN conventions, except when we want to, except when we want to say no. We have been dismal in our drug policies since the 80s. Our work in tobacco harm reduction is absolutely appalling. You know, I would say quite often I stand, and as does Alex, we stand in front of groups and say, Australia, we'll put our hand up, do not do what we do. Please do not follow us. And in some ways, even, I tell you, your comments today reflected that as well, that we're out of step and we're unaligned. And so I think there's a role for us to play. And I think the consultation that is coming out of the Colombian motion is very important. And I was at a conference on democracy last week, where a lot of Latin American countries were present. Now, drug policy and human rights, you cannot divide, you know, and you look at countries like Colombia, where 26 politicians have been assassinated by drug cartels, where the Mexican president, she is trying her damnedest, and I think Colombia is doing the right way, like, how can we work with these cartels? And Mexico, they're doing the same. But in Venezuela, for example, literally thousands of political activists have been murdered. And a lot of that is to do with the illicit drug trade. And the power that we have given those cartels through our prohibition on drugs. And I think that's the story that the UN needs to be considering. And the fact that we've got the orange, what did you call him? The orange man. The orange man from America bombing fishing boats out of Venezuela.
You get paid $500.
Murdering poor people who are caught up in this illicit drug trade that really America started. You know, and I just one final reflection, you know, in this, when I looked at what we had said in a 2017 drug law reform report, committee report that I had initiated, we looked at the international conventions right at the beginning of the report, because we thought, actually, you've got to start here if you're going to look at drug law reform. And we looked at the Hague Convention and the fact that we in Australia banned opium because we didn't like Chinese people and we thought they were, you know, we thought opium was terrible. Well, the Compter General, as it were, so sort of the customs, I guess the customs official said, well, that was a bloody disaster. We've now got more people using opium, and that 60,000 quid that we used to get from a duty on opium, we no longer get. Now, 100 years later, 115 years later, we are saying exactly the same thing, that it has been a complete failure. We have known this, but I would, Andrew, you were going to...
No, I was going to say, on the opium, we should be adding this to you look at other countries and what they're doing with the... we're doing it too. We're responsible for the opium epidemic in the US, and that goes back to the ODC, our two-country company. There's all of that, And
if I could just make a couple of final points. One is I just want to shout out to Reese Cohen here from Pennington. Reese has done a huge body of work on what cannabis regulation could look like in Australia. And I really commend you to look at his report on this. But, you know, the principles of protecting health, improving community safety and fighting crime, controlling cannabis and ensuring effective oversight and protecting the legal economy. If those are the 4 principles that we work on for cannabis regulation, I think that will put us in a good place. My last point is language, people. I do not think this is about a recreational market. We don't have recreational alcohol, we don't have recreational tobacco. It is adult use. And if we can start using that, it changes the language. As we have just learned in Victoria through a decriminalisation bill, most state governments now hate the word decriminalisation because they don't understand it and it means something different to everyone. So I know, like, I did the inquiry and set up the legislation to decriminalise sex work. I can tell you the decriminalisation of sex work and the legislation required for that is completely different to decriminalisation of cannabis. So we've started looking at if decriminalisation might be something more like civil penalties, might be more like depenalising, but probably I've started to use, in Victoria in particular, I've started to use civil penalties as the next small step, and it's where Jeff went in WA, and it's where the ACT in South Australia had also gone. The other area is, I often hear people saying treating cannabis like we treat alcohol and tobacco. Don't, because we don't treat them very well. And also, they weren't an illicit market. Well, they are now, you know, tobacco in particular, but back in for regulation, they were regulating a legal product. We are now talking about changing the regulation of a product that is illicit today. So I think we should be talking about the legal regulation of cannabis. We should be talking about adult use cannabis. And I think from a UN perspective, I love this idea of connecting the human rights connection with the drug law reform.
Multiple jurisdictions, and specifically the Global South.
That's right, and then I just look at the deaths that I think that Colombia will push, because to be a politician in Colombia, you have to be an extremely brave person.
Well, also to be a lawyer, and especially a civil rights or human rights lawyer, because they're slaughtering them by the tens each week. I follow it each week, and it's the same throughout South Central America, and now it's happening. Pakistan and India are awful for it as well. So it's not just politicians. There's a lot of people who work in professions who just disappear on a weekly basis.
Well, on that, at the conference I was at, it was a conference of International Association of Political Consultants. One of the board members of that committee, that association, could not be at the conference because he was in jail. He was a political campaigner, and his campaign was, sadly and happily for him, was the mayor of Istanbul, who did very well.
I was about to say, I've just been in Turkey,
who is now in jail.
So much talking about.
I think this is I was sceptical at the beginning of the question you were posing to us, Sean. I'm less sceptical.
I don't know the answer. It's still a question.
I don't know the answer either, but I'm now more enthused about it, and I think I'm enthused with the prospect of the Colombian motion being considered, and I think that's a role for everyone in this room, that maybe together that's where Australia can play a part in that reform. I mean, I think we have to fix our own backyard, and many of us here are trying to do that, and I think, Ataya, you made some really good points about where we can fix that in the medicinal area. Reese is doing a whole bunch of work on what a legal model can look like. I'm doing work in that area. Brian, Miles, all of you are doing work in that area. So I think, this has been really useful, and I do think there is work for us to do as a group, and I do think there is a role for people in this room and for Australia to play.
Yeah, so I think there's wonderful minds in Australia. So why not use them?
Yes, Dr. Wodok.
Australian revenue, government revenue from tobacco has fallen from $16 billion to $7 billion a year. and it's going to be very hard to claw that back. Secondly, vaping at the moment is not taxed, and it's going to be hard to tax a commodity which is over 90% controlled by the black market anyway. Pete Costello used to say broaden the base and lower the rate, and there's a lot of sense in that, because the lower the tax rate, the less incentive there is for people to avoid paying
it. That's right.
And the less distortion there is on economic behaviours. So is there a case for saying that we should tax cannabis and to make up some of that shortfall, because we still need to find revenue for schools and hospitals?
I think one of our issues is that our constitution prohibits states from imposing excises and taxes. So every tax or excise in this country must sit at the federal level, and it must go through federal budget systems. So yes, we can. And I've asked this question of a constitutional barrister just 2 days ago. If Victoria, for example, was to legally regulate cannabis, could we ask the federal government to collect taxes on behalf of the state? Now, I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's an interesting question. What it looks like is we still need to change the Federal Act, because, still our Federal Narcotics Act and our Criminal Code ban the possession, cultivation, and distribution of cannabis. So if any state was to legalise or legally regulate cannabis, or try to, that legislation could be seen to be unconstitutional under our constitution, and the tax issues. But yes, we can, and I think yes, really, that's where we should be going, Alex. I totally agree with you.
I just did a submission to the Liquor and Gaming, the New South Wales Liquor and Gaming, and they charge a duty for the liquor licences. So
7%
has been High Court jurisprudence on whether or not that's a tax, and they've allowed those alcohol licensing duties. So state governments could raise money, I think, off licensing.
They could do it on testing. I mean, one of the models that we're looking at is what happens if it's a monopoly, if it's wholly owned by the government. So the government owns the cannabis and sells the cannabis. They can keep all the money. They can keep all the money then. But so just one thing, Denise, and then I'll catch you. I mean, one of the other things that was I was going to my mind here when you were speaking was an import tax. So, and I was mentioning to Reese and Miles, 5 cents on a gram of imported cannabis, that'll raise us about $3.2 million each year. That could go towards, the TGA could go towards regulating the market, the medicinal market better. 50 cents a gram will bring us in about $37 million. Now that would mean we could have a very well regulated industry. That means that the 24 months that people are waiting for their licenses would cease to exist, because we would actually have an authority that was was being well resourced. Sorry, Reese.
I was just going to add on the tax thing. Pennington Institute received some legal advice that we included in a report that we did, was the economic modelling on what a regulated market could generate for the state of Victoria. But the advice we got was that states can impose licensing fees, which should be based on a cost recovery basis. But one might be able to consider the social and economic costs of cannabis as part of that cost and base licenses accordingly. So some of that, can levy like a larger than usual license fee, the excess of which could go to fund addiction services.
You'd have to hypothecate it though. So you'd have to hypothecate it to health.
But it's all clever and difficult workarounds until the Commonwealth gets on board.
Yeah, the mongrel in me is coming to the fore. And, a patient of mine...
I've been waiting for it all day, Brian,
a patient of mine actually is taking the employer to the Court of International Human Rights because of the presence of THC while unimpaired, declared impaired, and then lost his job. So, and human rights has been mentioned a few times, especially with the Colombian movement now. How much could we then go on the attack? Well, I'm thinking more ourselves at a political level of demanding that we actually, as Australians, we stand up for human rights, and that these rights are being conflicted by the improper banning of what is actually a helpful medicine for most people who are using it.
I think we can try all we like, but as we've seen, New South Wales and Victoria are now New South Wales trying to change the age of criminal responsibility down. It completely flies in the face of all of the international conventions we have signed. So yes, we can argue it. I'm not sure that it will be.
What would also you could add to what you just said?
Yeah.
We need a Charter of Rights of Australia.
Yes! Yeah, I mean, look, Victoria's got one, but it's a charter that it's there, and we like it, but governments do not have to follow it. They have to tell you when they're not.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, when we look at the Canadian market, why Canada is so cannabis friendly and why we're constantly moving our law. I'm on a lot of consultations with Health Canada and changing laws to make things and I have a lot of Canadian friends who complain a lot about the laws of Canada because when you're in a system, you don't get to take a step back and realize that it's one of the best laws in the world for access and for things like that. So we'll complain about the fact that our edibles are at 10 milligram THC limits and they're not at 100, but you can still get them whenever you want.
But you can have two.
You can get 100 here because we don't regulate. We don't disallow that.
There's a little bit of a kind of gray area, but they made $2.2 billion in fiscal year ending 2024 March. So that's the incentive. I meet some people in the cannabis space that we work with, and even at our event in South Africa, and there's this really amazing idealism, which is great. But money is what makes things move. Money is what moves the needle, right? So if the government's going to make billions of dollars here, they're going to be way more interested in allowing laws to change.
Unfortunately, under our constitution, we've got this tension because the states are who have got the capacity, have got the role to regulate cannabis, but the federal government takes the money.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
So
we have
it's
province by province excise tax. So we have every single time we sell to a different province, they get a different cut of the pay.
We can't do that.
If something like that developed here, I think that would be the push.
Unconstitutional.
Yeah, they gotta make a little change there.
Oh, referendum, sorry.
Yeah, let's just do a referendum, that'll do it. A referendum to let states tax.
That'll go over.
They do with stamp duty, so it's just because it's
excise. There's stamp duty was carved out. So when the GST came in, stamp duty was carved out, and so was when you employ people, payroll tax.
But you can see something floating like it's done with an alcohol license with a percentage turnover fee.
And there's also things like you look at the models like the wheat board or the wool board, where the government ostensibly the board owned the wheat and then was the wholesaler, and that is a model we should look at to consider as a revenue raiser for the states. But we've still then got to deal with the situation that any state that regulates cannabis is still it's still out of step with federal legislation, and federal legislation trumps.
Right, yeah.
Which is a problem, but that's the situation in America right now as well, right? So it's not, and you would like to think the current federal government would not step in, and because the other point of our constitution is that states are meant to be laboratories and they're meant to try different things. They're not meant to necessarily all be on the same page.
How would we go here federally tax-wise and stuff like that? Is it the same problem that we've got in the States where, because it's still federally illegal,
States in the US have many more taxing powers than
but the federal can't. So there's the whole idea with this new scheduling they're talking about, because it actually will allow tax deductions on the income. Which
that's to do with incompatibility with federal tax law,
and banking laws and stuff
which
like
makes
that.
state legal cannabis businesses ineligible for 280E tax offsets. That's a slight particular American curiosity.
But it's also affected their ability to access financial institutions. Is that going to
It's all
go here too?
Well, just on a different point, because we say there's a contradiction between criminal law at state and federal, but under the Constitution, the Commonwealth doesn't actually have power to pass criminal laws, and the courts have actually said we're not really sure where the Commonwealth drug laws come from. The place they get authority for the Commonwealth drug laws is the UN Conventions under the External Affairs power.
Absolutely right.
And so therefore, once again, it comes back to the UN. If we can get reform at the UN, or if you could make an argument that the UN conventions don't justify the Commonwealth laws, they would be beyond power. So, you know, and if there is there's also a famous case, Momcilovic from Victoria, where there were arguments because the Victorian drug laws contradicted the Commonwealth drug laws, different penalties for different offences, things like that. And you know, so there can be arguments about which criminal law trumps which, and the Commonwealth doesn't always necessarily win that argument.
Nothing's insurmountable if we want it that way.
I just want to make a comment that's completely left field. I've been thinking all afternoon about social change and how you bring about change. It's inspired by the panel members, and I've evolved a very crude theory analogous, I think it's analogous to surfing. A good surfer has to spot a wave, get successfully on it, and then stay upright. That's the sustainability bit. Now, part of the trick, if you're an academic, as I have been all my career, to try and get research into practice, is to spot the wave, to know when there is enough of a consensus, and the word consensus has been used several times today. If you want to bring about change, you've got to get people on board, including your opponents. Now, Australians will, I think in my very long experience, coalesce around two things. Is it fair? And are vulnerable people, particularly children, getting hurt? Now, my final point is that I think your lever for change in this country with regard to cannabis laws is to revive harm minimisation as a policy which has been allowed to die completely over this since the turn of the century at least, and to communicate clearly that cannabis, any risks associated with the use of cannabis are vastly outweighed by the benefits and by the not doing harm through the criminal justice system. That argument has not been made successfully or clearly in a way that people in Townsville and Cunnamulla and anywhere, the person on the street can understand and say, yes, I get that, I get behind that.
I think it's a really good point, and it's something that we should always remember, that this is about harm reduction, and that cannabis harms are almost entirely related to the criminality of it. However, where we have got to win is that over 80% of Australians agree with you. 80% of Australians actually don't think that the use of cannabis should be a crime.
But that's not translating into law, policy or practice.
It's not, but we've got that community opinion, and that is a start for the consensus. We have consensus.
But it's necessary but not sufficient.
I totally agree with you, but I think if we have that. Now, if we had $1 zillion to run the campaign to bring everybody on board.
I don't think it's possible. Anyway,
yeah,
it's just my.
No, I
and it's good.
Kate.
We're seeing something really unfortunate that I've noticed over the last year or two, and I'm blaming the TGA very squarely for this. And this is to do with their advertising laws. We definitely saw some very bad Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle ads. But what's happened is we've actually seen the media step away from telling positive stories about cannabis, and back to that, helping, what we're seeing is the negative stories. That gets all the press because that's not going to breach an advertising law. But if it's that these people have these amazing stories, we're just not seeing them in the media. So the negative is being allowed to control that narrative. It's really unfortunate. I actually do think it's an unintended consequences of those laws. Now, I definitely put that in my submission to the TGA, and we may, I don't know if I'll change that, because those advertising rules apply to all medicines in Australia, so they're not cannabis specific. But I think we're seeing, there's two things here. One is the positives of medicinal cannabis, and the second part is the positives of cannabis legalisation. And that is not controlled by the TGA. If we're not talking medicinal, TGA's got nothing to do with it. So I think trying to get stories out there of lack of harm reduction, of positive stories for people from cannabis. Back to that concept earlier from Mel about using networks. That's one way to try to start fighting this narrative that's crept in over the last year about how harmful cannabis is.
We need Murdoch on side.
Yes.
I say that, but I think when we were trying to advocate for the supervised injecting centre in Victoria, we got the police on side. We got the civil society on side. We got the community on side. When we got the Herald Sun on side, then we had won. They're not on side anymore. We've lost them, but we won. And I think for cannabis, we need to do the same. The first thing when we've got a new Liberal leader in Victoria, young, 35, woman, moderate. When I heard the news, the first thing I did was ring Young Liberals because they put up a motion to legalise cannabis in Victoria. And again, I think to your point of bringing that consensus, if we can bring the Liberals along, and I know Alex has talked about this for decades, that it will be the economic argument that will win the Conservatives. If we can do that, then and also Murdoch. So it's like I've got to get Barnaby Joyce and Rupert Murdoch on side, and then I think we've got a chance.
I don't think Barnaby's against cannabis, is he? I think Barnaby's a little bit positive.
Barnaby was really good on medicinal cannabis. In fact, he's actually better on cannabis. He should use cannabis and not alcohol.
Yeah.
He would be a lot better.
Just real quick anecdote. So we Pension Institute ran some billboard advertisements either earlier this year or last year. I can't remember.
It was this year.
It was this year. Thank you. Promoting our campaign to it's time to legalise and regulate cannabis. And we got declined from some outdoor advertisers for that campaign on the basis that a news outlet had recently been fined for breaching TGA and medicinal cannabis advertising regulations. And this advertiser was concerned that our campaign around cannabis law reform, explicitly unrelated to different from medical cannabis, would fall foul of TGA advertising regulations. So, yeah.
Breathe deeply.
I'm not surprised.
No. Yeah.
I tried to get ChatGPT to draw a cartoon of Queen Victoria smoking a joint, and ChatGPT said no, they wouldn't do that. Then I said, could I get a picture of Queen Victoria smoking a cigarette and looking relaxed? And they said, yes, we can do that.
When I've done stuff with that's the co-pilot one, same thing. You ask for it to do anything with cannabis, he goes, oh no, I can't do that. Can you draw me something with hemp? Yeah, no problem. So yeah, you little hemp pictures there. So on the consensus thing, I'm agreeing with you on we've got to stop using recreation as a word, because like alcohol's available, most people don't use it for recreation. Might be once a month they have recreation, the rest of the time
they just don't call it recreation.
Yeah. Well, they're taking the edge off. The other one that's worrying me in terms of our broader campaign is that there's this real focus on personal medicine. And as a herbalist, and Brian will know this, you can't expect the TGA to loosen their grip on this if we expect them to deregulate medicine. We've got to go back to the adult choice use, access for freedom, all this sort of thing, if we want the TGA to even relax their idea. If we keep talking about all the medical benefits and that we want to grow our own medicine and all this sort of thing, we're just going to put them offside terribly. We need to divide the conversation to the medical over here and the adult take the edge off over here. Yep. It's a fun thing, it's a friend with benefits.
Yeah.
It's not medicine.
And we, and I think that's another area where the UN has moved. So on cannabis, the UN has also recognised the medicinal qualities of cannabis, and they have responded accordingly, and they have recognised that. So yeah, we have actually seen a couple of good movements on cannabis, but Sean, we've got a bigger job to do.
Well, it seems from the day that we've got to attack from the top, attack from the bottom, and then at the bottom third, and then from the flanks, and then the bottom third, the middle third, and the top third, all at the same time, with only 32 of us.
Yeah.
But if that be the case, that be the case.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sean and Atia and Tom for organising us. Oh, ChatGPT now will do a joint.
Did you just ask that one?
There's policy in some of those companies in America, not the banks.
ChatGPT can do that.
Yeah, so you just put happy in there and they'll make her happy, they'll give her a smile on it. It's brilliant, Brian. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Fiona. Thank you very much indeed. I was going to do a wrap up, but I think probably everybody's a little bit tired by now. I've got an email list. Essentially, what Nataya and I are doing is we have an annual conference in Cape Town every June, and we're creating meetings like this around the world through law schools, universities mainly. I'm talking to the US at the moment and the UK, and then I'm going to try and talk to law schools throughout Africa, throughout Asia, and try and build and develop this conversation. In Australia, I'm hoping to do something at the Mardi Gras in Nimbin for a different audience in May, and I was just talking to the couple of guys with lawyers, one who's based in Perth, and see whether I can do something similar in Western Australia. So I'm really looking to create, as always, a volunteer working group of proactive Australians to join proactive Zambians, South Africans, Germans, Portuguese, and so on and so forth, to discuss these issues out, but also try and present a more combined effort to the UN on top of what the Colombians are doing, but through the aegis of using universities, a little bit of intellectual thought. And I'm trying to collect all this information and create a research hub online that's going to be free for everybody to access, and it'll be through the law school at Cape Town University. So it's a big project. These things take time. As Alex well knows, it's an up, down, in, out, 40-year process that will achieve some things but won't achieve everything you want. But I do feel that having looked at the last 20 years, it can be done better. So it's just finding all those people who know how it can be done better and drawing on their generosity and experience to try and move things forward, so our grandchildren and their children don't have to put up with this stupidity. It's really, that's the level that I'm at when I'm thinking about this stuff. So thank you very much for coming, listening, and contributing.
Thank you.
Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize the coming how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.